2 people had been sent in the early wave of settlers, and I wish one of them was anyone but me. The new world faced me on all sides, and the sun was setting quick. I was so distracted and dumbfounded that this was happening in the first place, that Jelly, the other settler, took charge and told me to follow him. It was imperative that we found food and shelter, and fast. Of course, the food part presented no challenge for Jelly, who had come more prepared than I. He eviscerated half the mountain's wildlife for meat before fleeing off into the forest on the edge of the snowy mountain. I followed quickly. At the speed he was running, and with all that meat in his pocket, he seemed like some kind of crazed goblin from hell. But I had to follow that crazed goblin from hell. He was the closest thing I had to a leader at this point. As soon as this night passed, it'd be easy to build up a shelter in a fresh location and start a survivable world for our new settlers. But at this point, I had nothing. In fact, I didn't even have Jelly anymore. As we scampered into the forest, I lost him as he ran ahead. The first low groan of a zombie let me know that I had to pick up the pace too and find him as soon as possible. Then the rain came, as if things couldn't get any worse. This all seemed so theatrical that I was thinking I would snap out of a daze of immersion and realize I was watching a production on a stage. But no such thing happened. I was still the main star of the show, and the only audience was monsters, set on eating my bones and meat and various other organs. Before I saw the source, I felt the warmth, a lava lake that had burned a clearing of trees around it. This at least allowed me to have a spot I could stay and wait for the sun to come up, hiding on these trees, while monsters gathered below me and thunder cracked above. This wasn't exactly a pleasant start that I was pitched when joining the settlers, but an unbreakable brotherhood we are, and so I swallowed my fears and waited out the night for the Birch Crusade. After an utterly breathtaking and groundbreaking brawl with a zombie, I got a chance to take in my surroundings, and the forest that was so large and dark and intimidating and seemed like the end of the world the night before had suddenly transformed into a peaceful haven of nature and greenery, even though it was the same location. As it turns out, the hiding spot I had cowardly chosen on top of a tree in a hurry in the middle of the rainy night was actually nearby where Jelly was staying, and he'd managed to build a base while I was hiding like a coward on top of a tree. After some more nail-biting action, such as harvesting mushrooms, I decided to follow him to his base, not before he eviscerated some monsters and some more wildlife. I'm not really sure what the chicken was doing to him, but he seemed to know best, so I helped out and killed another chicken. It was a short walk through a clearing of trees that revealed where his little base was. It was actually more like a house, in fact, which only brought me frustration, given that if I'd only walked a few paces in this direction, I wouldn't have had to sleep on top of a tree in the middle of the pouring rain while zombies were clawing at the side of that tree, trying to eat my brains and meat and various other organs. Though, the one thing I took away from this spot was all the birch. Of course, we are members of the Birch Crusade, believing deeply that birch is the ugliest wood and must be purged from this world, only used for burning purposes. I wasn't sure why Jelly had chosen to park himself near so much birch, mountains of it in fact. I suppose he was so dedicated to his mission that he did more than just avoid birch. He sought it out actively to destroy it. That was certainly dedication, and it was dedication I wasn't sure I would have time to commit. After briefly forgetting how sticks work, I used the resources that Jelly lent me, as well as those I had found, to gather a toolkit to help me set off on my way. I couldn't live too close to him. In fact, one of the reasons we had left the old world, yes, left, was because it had gotten too crowded, and living too close to each other would just create that problem again, and we can't afford to have that considering all we've invested into this. Jelly was nice enough to lend me some food, and I looked out onto the birch vista, wondering what it would look like pretty soon once he was done with it. There was one fruit that I didn't yield from staring out into the ravine outside of Jelly's soon-to-be home for so long. Looking down into the ravine, I saw a cave entrance at the base in the river. A monster quickly welcomed me in, serving as a warning to what these caves meant. That warning did not stay long in my head, however, because the beauty of these caves was simply hypnotic. All the riches in the world for anyone who was brave enough, or smart enough, to learn how to utilize them. Truly anybody who could take control of such resources could take control of the world. Not that that was my interest or anything. We'd come to the new world to dispose of such thoughts. All the same, the thought was appealing. Too appealing, in fact. I wasted so much time picking away at unnecessary resources and dreaming of riches that I'd wasted all the time I'd set aside for venturing into the wilds and finding a new home, and there was no way I could leech off a jelly one more night. I had to set off into the dark. It was the only way. After much treacherous backtracking into the dark, I'd gotten lucky and faced no monsters. I was there in the empty field by the snowy mountain, and this would be the place I'd officially set off, after gathering some more resources. However, all was not what it seemed, and the snowy mountains were not the same as I had last faced them. To my shock, as I took a step, the snow gave way and enveloped me. This was something I had never experienced before. Remember, I had not faced the wilds in a long time, and such phenomena did not exist when I had. I didn't know what to do. All I did know is this was starting to hurt. Deeply, in fact. The cold was washing over all my body, skin and bones, heart and organs. I gave way to my instincts and started digging around me. Thankfully, that worked. The snow had fallen off my body, and I was finally able to get what little warmth I could in this snowy mountain, at least not enveloped in the snow. I wasn't sure what had happened. This was a type of snow I did not recognize, and from a distance I couldn't tell it was any different from the solid snow I had been walking on for years. All the same, I decided to dig around me some more. Hopefully I could get some space and breathing room. I wasn't sure how I was going to get out of here, but since the sun had now completely gone, I wasn't sure I wanted to at all. As soon as my mind returned to reason, that was the decision I'd made. I was going to wait out the night in this strange, powdery snow hole. The place that had just brought me such danger only moments ago, and a strange, ironic twist, was now going to bring me some semblance of safety as I waited for the monsters and the night to pass. It was desperate and treacherous, but so far, lately, in this new world that's supposed to be better, my life has been treacherous and desperate. joy washed over my heart just like the sun washed over my cold, wet face. I was free from that dreadful, freezing snow pit. I was so happy I thrust right into a skeleton in combat without even hesitating, hitting him with the snow just to give him a taste of what I had just experienced. Of course, that strange, bizarre high soon faded, and pragmatism washed over my brain. The sun was back on my side, and it was fresh and new. I had a whole day to find a new home. After comparing some snow visually, just so I would never make that same mistake again, I gathered some wood and other resources and set off on my way properly this time. The whole affair with the night, the snow, and the skeleton had left me badly injured. Just a breath from a pig could probably send me to my death. So I had to be careful and tread very lightly. After all, you never know when your next wrong step could be your last. Never. It turns out I was wrong in my previous assessment that the birch forest stretched on for infinite miles, as it ended and I came upon a dark oak wood forest. And that's the one that stretched on for infinite miles. Despite all the places where I thought I could make a homestead, each one seemed wrong. I gathered some wood and pondered on it, and I decided to keep moving forward. There had to be a better place. Maybe I wasn't far enough, maybe the ground wasn't flat enough, maybe the trees weren't thick enough. But then, after I'd taken after Jelly a bit, eviscerated every cow in sight, I wandered into the forest a bit more, and I finally saw the place that seemed to tickle this unknown fancy of mine, and would be my new home in this new world. The trees cleared away, and I saw it for the first time, and in that moment, I already knew. It was quite an anomaly, a stone beach surrounded by dark oak trees on all sides. Stone went up, and stone went down, and stone went all around. It had been a while since I'd pondered my career as someone who mined stone and ores and such. But my instincts kicked in immediately. I started digging away at coal, and I just felt at home again. This would certainly be the place. I could make a wonderful quarry out of it. The Stonedigger's Quarry. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like that title belonged to me again. I quickly got to work, leveling out a place where I could build a building to surround myself in so monsters could finally not have a chance to get to me, to get to my meat and heart and bones and various other organs. Before I knew it, I'd chewed away at a whole pickaxe. It just came to me like instinct, and that instinct only faded as soon as the pickaxe broke. Once I had a bed put together that at least I knew I would come back here if a bad fate ever struck me, I got to work on other things, a furnace, a crafting table, anything I would need to call this place my home. And in fact, I would call it my home. The Stonedigger's Quarry would be the best quarry I'd ever had. For once, I'd be digging for myself, and not for anybody else. Any regret I might have felt in my heart about choosing this place as a place to settle, it soon faded with the next sunrise, and the next, each one more beautiful than the last, as the orange warm light washed over the cool gray stone before my eyes. I couldn't wait for the other settlers to see this place, and that only reminded me that they weren't here yet. I know, these things take time, but it was still a thing that was making me anxious. We couldn't settle too close to each other, but would at least be able to be close enough or be able to know where each other were and visit and help each other out. And I had plans for at least one person to stay here with me as some kind of assistant quarryman. Perhaps they'd be a fisherman or something, because after all, this place I had chosen to settle was very close to some water, a small river surrounded by trees on either side which led out to the ocean. Using all the wood around me, I decided to get straight to work. I dug up some sand also from the river nearby, and some coal that was sticking out on the top of the stone beach that was called Stonedigger's Quarry. This would give me all the essential elements to having a working little hut. It wouldn't be much of a mansion, but I'm sure that could come someday. I got to work on the basic support structures, using a villager's home as reference, with logs sticking straight up in the corners and planks lining the outside. It was quite a luxurious look that you could get for not very much wood. You may notice that I'm stalling a bit, trying a bunch of strange configurations, such as the quad door, and using trapdoors in the ceiling as a sort of sunroof. And that's because, frankly, I am stalling, and that's why this turned into a kind of quasi-house-building tutorial. Truth be told, there wasn't much to do while I was here alone, except start my quarry and build my little hut. I was desperately waiting for someone else to show up. I usually leave the art of building things to other people more suited for it. There are quite some talented builders out there, and I don't consider myself one of them. But one of the few staples I do have is an emphasis on natural light. I use trapdoors in the absence of glass, especially on the ceiling. It gives a sort of sunroof effect, and also makes the ceiling feel higher. Okay, it's not much of a unique staple, but it's all I have. Like I said, I'm more of a digger than a builder. In this audacious absence of allies, I'd have to be a faux engineer as well and install all the appliances, chests, bed, furnace, crafting table, all of the bare necessities to get me through these early days. After all, this was my home and my quarry, and frankly, it's hard to trust anyone else if you don't know them from the deepest part of your mind and heart to do anything with your stuff. Frankly, these things are better done by yourself. In this case, myself. And as for myself, all that was left to do now was to start digging and make this quarry a quarry. I woke up bright and early the next morning, and at this point I established my new morning routine. After I'd wake up, I'd make the tools I needed, check outside each of my little trapdoor windows to make sure there are no monsters waiting to ambush me to take my blood and brains and various other organs. Once that was done, I'd walk outside, shut the door behind to make sure those monsters didn't get in, and then I started digging. And dig I did. The only real levity and break I had in the day was to eat and to let a burning zombie chase me around. I didn't even hit it. It's a bit sick, but so are zombies. There's something addicting about squares when you're digging that people who don't dig like this don't seem to understand. The thing is, when you see a surface that's uneven and natural, your instinct is to smooth it out. But then if you smooth out the surface next to it, you can make that a square. This continues on until the next thing you know, your area is massive and very smooth. The only reason I stopped digging was because my pickaxe broke, which was a sign to go to bed. The days that followed were all like this, and my quarry was getting deeper and deeper, so much so I had to create a system to integrate a staircase in it as I dug so I wouldn't have to add it later. After all, you can't just dig a hole. Many hours and days came and went like this, and next thing you know, my pockets and my chests were full of cobblestone. Although occasionally I broke this rule, generally the way my system worked was that I'd have to dig one layer at a time, meaning the first iron I found I couldn't dig until I dug up all the nonsense andesite that was above it. Man, it was a tantalizing temptation. It was my first bit of iron ore I'd found. At least while I was wasting away digging the andesite, I could dream about what this meant. Iron ore. I was no longer stuck digging rudimentary industrious sources like stone and coal. I had iron now. I could dig gold, redstone, emeralds, and dare I even dream about it, diamonds. I was coming up in the world. Yes, I'm aware I am saying that while digging into a musty rock hole in the middle of a stone beach. But it's about relatives. And relative to where I started in the morning, I could tell the sun was now setting. A purple hue was filling the sky. Man, I'd spent another night here. That iron ore was going to have to wait. There's no way I was mining in the dark. I had insufficient torches. But I couldn't help myself. I dug up the iron as quickly as I could, breaking my one layer at a time rule. Just this once, hopefully. I accidentally shaved off the logs in the corner of my house today for the sake of consistency. I had to do the rest. A chicken will wander into my quarry. Naturally, that becomes my lunch. He stepped into I noticed monsters haven't bugged me much. I guess they're no longer interested in my brains and blood and various other trees around me. I'm going to have to get to destroying them eventually, but I can't use fire. I wonder how many leaves I can see in just my eyesight. I'd count, but that strangest stone configuration today, it looked like an X. Mining is a madness, and mining is an addiction. And with that addiction comes lots of resources which propel you to continue that addiction even further. There was only one thing to do. I was getting all kinds of resources, especially copper, which wasn't particularly useful, but I had lots of it. So I took to getting my ores and turning them into blocks whenever possible, and burying them under the stone in front of my lodge. This way, if someone came and decided to have sticky hands in my home, they wouldn't get the bulk of my resources, and they wouldn't tell anybody what it was. Just so I wouldn't lose it, I marked it with andesite, throwing some on the side just so it seemed vaguely natural, especially compared to the large granite chunks I'd left either side of it. Of course, these days, I wasn't even sure who I was really going to be protecting from. Technically, this is what I wanted. A self-sufficient life controlled only by myself, doing what I do best and succeeding at it, without any kind of resistance. But I'd been doing it for months, and completely alone. I was starting to doubt if the other settlers were even going to come at all. This is what I wanted. But at the same time, it doesn't seem particularly satisfying to get what you want and do so alone. Perhaps I didn't have to be self-sufficient. Earlier, I'd posted a sign in my lodge pretty much admitting this. Help wanted. I'm not sure who for. At this point, I didn't even believe anyone was coming at all. That I and Jelly, who I also hadn't seen for months since the initial landing, were the only ones in this new world. It's a depressing and admittedly overly melodramatic thought, but these are the kind of thoughts you're stuck with when you're sitting there digging in a square for months and months and months. My resources were plentiful, especially with cobblestone. But at the same time, I had no end in which to use that except one day to build myself a large house, or at this point even a castle. Frankly, that was the dream that was keeping me going, mining repetitive stone and occasionally resources. Some kind of mansion or castle. A bold empire created just by me. With only me at this point. I know, again with the melodrama, but that's how it felt. A day like any other was coming and going until, lo and behold, my prayers, and let's be honest, my whining, was finally answered. At long last, a communication from another settler. He said he'd settled in a village of the savannah, and that he had become the mayor of this village. Which is to say, he was the richest person in that village. Bit of confusion there. I think I knew where a savannah was, so I decided to go there as soon as I possibly could. And by that I mean I packed some stuff, unpacked some stuff, packed some stuff, got back to work. Frankly, I was stalling and waffling a bit. It'd been a long time since I actually set out on a journey. The last time was when I'd found this place in the first place. So to calm my nerves, I did some more digging. It's pretty much the only thing I could do. Soon I was provided with the coordinates and bearings required to go and find my friend. I noticed the coordinates said he was out in the water, so I put together a boat and got to work. Sailing across a ocean, it would seem. Thankfully, I wouldn't have to go across the entire ocean, just enough to skip to the island nearby. This corresponds with where I thought a savannah was. Eternally an easily distracted person, I saw a shipwreck and went to it, even though I only got some carrots, some wheat, some coal, and some really weird soup. I also found some flowers, and I picked those. Again, I was stalling and waffling. These weren't important errands, but at least they were errands I could do. To delay that moment of truth, which I would discover how the other settlers had been faring on their own. I was hoping I wasn't a primitive caveman compared to them. Perhaps they'd already conquered all the world and created a society. But in this case, I knew my friend had only adopted a society. I walked through a village, but it didn't correspond with the coordinates. I walked past a field, and there was another village. 2 towns, North and Southtown. He was the ruler of only one of them. Night fell as I finally reached Southtown, the one that he had owned. There were a bunch of villagers there, but these natives really were only interested in trading with foreigners like me. They weren't much for conversation. Finally, I saw another settler, the mayor of Southtown. Quite the aristocrat. The grand, self-elected mayor of Southtown informed me that Southtown was having a bit of a monster problem. Which is to say, he was. I quickly caught wind of this when a creeper snuck up on me and blew a crater into his town. And connected the dots that this wasn't the first crater that this town had. Not to mention, it was flooded with zombies. The least I could do was run around and help a bit. The iron golem was not of much use. Probably because he was almost dead. But much to my surprise, he didn't seem to mind any of this at all. In fact, he showed me a tour of his little home and his town as if nothing had happened, and then granted me a present of some armor as thanks for coming. I hadn't had armor yet, so this was definitely a nice surprise. Not as surprising as the fact that he was basically letting this town fall to decay. It was lovely to see my friend again, but it was clear I didn't want any more part of the Southtown saga, so I quickly got out of there as soon as I could, after exchanging thanks. It was back home to digging, but somehow it wasn't depressing anymore. Even with rain and day passing, I'd seen someone else. I knew that they were settlers being successful. In fact, way too successful. He had diamond armor and iron armor and golden things. I was so behind. I'd barely just found iron. I definitely need to move quicker. My fear of being the caveman in the group was starting to come true, and it was coming true fast. Before I let these anxious ramblings get into my head, I noticed that the floor was becoming moss, and then the moss was becoming a cave, full of creatures that at the time I'd never seen before, which you obviously know to be axolotls. Well, this was a fascinating discovery, and it definitely lifted my spirits. There's a lot of stuff in here that I could definitely use, even if it was just pretty. After a bit of exploration and investigating one of these strange but adorable little creatures, I realized I hadn't even hit deep slate yet. There was more mining in this quarry to do, and I had to keep it nice and square, so I started building a sort of bracing so I could continue as if nothing happened, and put a staircase around, again as if nothing had happened. Once all the work had been done, I rewarded myself by putting some pretty little bushes I'd found in that cave in front of my tiny little lodge. It's been said of me that I can tend to be quite emotional, and things that don't really excite other people excite me in very strange ways. But when I dug up that diamond ore, I felt all kinds of warm emotions: triumph, nostalgia, and comfort that I'd finally made the right decision. This quarry had finally given something back to me, and had proven that teaching a dog new tricks not only wasn't possible, it wasn't even necessary. I was up to speed with everyone else, at least in some way, and a smile crept upon my face in a way that it hadn't in a long, long time. I dug through the pouring rain, my face in a grin. Things had finally started to turn for the better. In these moments, I had a realization. It was time I stopped trying to do all these things alone, try to be my own man, controlled by nobody. The fact of the matter is, I can't do this alone, and being alone as long as I have drove me nearly mad. I had to get help. I didn't have to be afraid anymore that sacrificing my independence was the same as asking for help. My moment of earnest clarity came at the perfect time, as in the next wave of settlers, my old friend Dungeon Power arrived. And I gave him the offer to come and stay with me at Stonedigger's quarry, and he agreed. At long last, there was someone else here to share this crazy dream of mine with. Become an industrial force like no other, self-independent, rich like all the people who once put us down. Soon, we together built him a little lodge as well, so he had something to shield him from the monsters that wanted to eat his blood and brains and various other organs. While the resources that filled my underground store were rather mundane, they were at least plentiful, once again reminding me that this quarry, although not quite modern and hip with the deep slate cavern ways, was at least producing something for me. It was effective, and I was starting to have to clear more room just to fit all this ore blocks in here. Things didn't stop there either. On our first expedition together, the two of us found a mine shaft that was connected near the quarry. Inside were a bunch of rails, which certainly gave us an idea. Our next projects would have to do with minecarts and the rails they rode on. It would make things so much more efficient. Our business partnership and birch-hating brotherhood was solidified on this expedition. We stayed down there for a while and we gathered so much resources that our inventories were brimmed. This put all doubts out of my head that I had to do this all alone by myself. It was important to branch out a little bit without sacrificing your independence. My ambition still related to the quarry and looking downward and digging and resources and ores and diamonds and all that crazy stuff. And he adopted my ambition rather well. At the same time, I adopted his ambition. He looked out to the sea, and he was a lot less nautically challenged than I was. He wanted to use tricks to create some kind of crazy rail bridge from the Stonedigger's quarry all the way to the island on the other side of the gulf where Southtown sits. I kind of like the sound of that. Nighttime fell once more, and for once I wasn't alone. There were 2 lodges instead of 1. There were monsters, but I wasn't afraid because I knew I had someone to help my back. The quarry was deep, but I wasn't worried because I had 2 people to help dig it. The island of Southtown was far away, but soon it would be just a small rail ride away. Things were going lovely. I'd finally found a true home, and I'd finally made it a comfortable place to live. Of course, don't mistake my glee for confidence or carelessness, because I know things aren't over yet. And there's a big future ahead of me still. And there's scary things that lurk in the dark.